Dive deep into the explosive saga of Elon Musk, Donald Trump, and the seismic shifts reshaping global politics and the economy. Like, subscribe, and drop your insights below as we unravel the layers behind these high-stakes dramas. In the theater of American power, few characters command the stage quite like Elon Musk. The billionaire technocrat, celebrated for his cerebral prowess and audacious vision, now finds himself at the crossroads of innovation and influence. This is no ordinary performance. Musk's empire spans from the depths of Earth's tunnels to the expanse of Mars, each venture bearing his unmistakable signature of disruption. Yet as his rockets pierce the stratosphere, his ambitions have taken a decidedly earthbound turn into the treacherous arena of American politics. The spectacle unfolds with calculated precision. Donald Trump, the master of political theater, extends his hand to Musk, offering him the role of America's efficiency czar, a position that promises to reshape government in the image of Silicon Valley's relentless optimization. "He's going to cut through government waste like a rocket through the atmosphere," Trump declares, his rhetoric painting Musk as the deus ex machina for a bloated bureaucracy. Beneath this alliance, however, lies a labyrinth of contradictions. The same man who champions free speech bristles at criticism. The visionary who dreams of Mars colonies struggles with the messy realities of terrestrial governance. The self-proclaimed champion of humanity's future faces growing questions about whose future he truly represents. As comedian Bill Burr pointedly observed, "This guy wants to save humanity but can't stand being in a room with humans." The observation cuts to the heart of Musk's paradox, a genius seeking to solve humanity's greatest challenges, while displaying a fundamental disconnect from human experience. Musk's eyes reveal a hunger that transcends wealth or achievement, a void that neither SpaceX launches nor Twitter takeover seem capable of filling. It's the void of a man forever reaching for more influence, more control, more adoration. This is the dramatic tension now electrifying America's political landscape. As the billionaire who conquered space turns his gaze to conquering government, citizens and power brokers alike watch with fascination and trepidation. Is this the dawn of a new era of innovation in governance, or merely the latest chapter in America's ongoing struggle with the seductive pull of wealth and power? The answer hangs in the balance, suspended like a rocket awaiting launch, its trajectory yet to be determined. The political theater reached its climactic second act as Donald Trump stepped into the spotlight, his trademark showmanship on full display. With characteristic bombast that electrified his base, the former president unveiled his vision for America's future, one with Elon Musk at its technological helm. The Palm Beach ballroom buzzed with anticipation as Trump's voice boomed through the speakers. "Elon Musk will head the Department of Government Efficiency." The crowd erupted, unaware they were witnessing the formalization of America's newest and most consequential alliance. Not since the industrial barons of the early 20th century had a businessman been offered such proximity to the levers of governmental power. This wasn't merely an endorsement, it was a coronation. Trump, the master of political spectacle, recognized in Musk a kindred spirit whose brand of disruptive genius might legitimize his own return to power. For his part, Musk stood poised at the precipice of influence that even his considerable fortune couldn't purchase. "Together we'll cut the red tape and unleash American potential," Trump declared, casting Musk as the Silicon Valley savior come to rescue a bloated bureaucracy. The irony that two of America's most controversial billionaires position themselves as champions of everyday Americans hung in the air, unacknowledged, yet palpable. Behind this theatrical alliance lies a calculated exchange, Trump lending political legitimacy to Musk's governmental ambitions, while Musk offers Trump the veneer of technological progressivism. It's a partnership forged not in shared values, but in mutual utility, each man seeing in the other a vehicle for their own ambitions. Across Washington, power brokers and career civil servants watched with growing alarm. The prospect of a government run like a startup, with its relentless pace, ruthless efficiencies, and winner-take-all ethos, represented either revolutionary progress or existential threat, depending on where one stood in America's increasingly polarized landscape. For citizens caught in the middle, the spectacle raised profound questions. Would America's future be defined by the vision of tech titans and political strongmen? Could true democratic governance survive the cult of efficiency? And most critically, in this brave new world of billionaire governance, who would speak for those without wealth or power? The triumphant announcement in Palm Beach barely had time to echo across America's political landscape before the first cracks appeared in Musk's nascent political crusade. Green Bay, Wisconsin, a town more accustomed to football fervor than political protests, became ground zero for a collision between Silicon Valley ambition and Midwestern skepticism. The bitter December wind whipped through the crowd gathered outside the Brown County Arena, their anger providing more warmth than their heavy coats. 3,000 strong, they carried signs that read, "Billionaires can't buy democracy," and "Where's my Dogecoin profit?" This wasn't the scripted reception Musk had anticipated for his first campaign appearance. "You promised us to the moon, but we're stuck in the gutter," shouted one protester, referencing Musk's infamous cryptocurrency promotions that had left many everyday investors underwater. The tech titan's face, normally composed for television cameras, tightened visibly under the assault. Inside, Musk attempted to pivot to his message of governmental transformation, but the carefully orchestrated event derailed as local residents hijacked the question period. "How can you fix the government when you can't fix Tesla's quality control?" demanded one auto worker, triggering a cascade of uncomfortable questions about working conditions at Musk's factories. The confrontation in Green Bay exposed the fundamental contradiction at the heart of America's newest political alliance: the chasm between those who create technological empires and those who live with their consequences. For every promise of efficiency and innovation, the crowd seemed to harbor a counterexample of broken promises and forgotten communities. As Musk's security detail rushed him to his waiting vehicle, the mood inside his campaign war room darkened. This wasn't Silicon Valley, where bold declarations and ambitious timelines were met with investor enthusiasm. This was the American heartland, where results mattered more than rhetoric, and where generations of unfulfilled promises had cultivated a deep skepticism toward elite saviors. The Green Bay disaster revealed a crucial truth that both Trump and Musk would need to confront. America's political battlefield couldn't be conquered through Twitter pronouncements or boardroom tactics. It would be won or lost in places like this, where abstract visions of efficiency collided with the concrete realities of American life. The political wounds from Green Bay still fresh, Elon Musk retreated to familiar territory, the economics of power. If Middle America had rejected his overtures, perhaps the financial establishment would prove a more vulnerable target. The Federal Reserve Building in Washington stood as an imposing marble fortress, not unlike the institutional resistance Musk now faced in his political ascension. The hastily arranged economic forum had drawn the predictable mix of financial journalists, policy wonks, and curious onlookers. The room fell silent as Musk strode to the podium, his confidence seemingly undimmed by recent setbacks. "The Federal Reserve has become a bloated, bureaucratic monster," Musk declared, his voice rising with each syllable. 5,000 employees burning through billions while steering us toward economic catastrophe. The audience shifted uncomfortably as he continued his broadside, attacking not just the institution's size but its very purpose. "We need massive spending cuts, 50% across every federal department, including the Fed. The math doesn't lie." Behind his words lurked a vision of governance designed by engineering logic rather than social contract. A technocracy optimized for efficiency rather than equity. Outside the venue, the reaction was swift and visceral. Market analysts warned of instability, while social service advocates calculated the human cost of Musk's proposed austerity. "He's talking about gutting programs that keep families afloat," argued Congresswoman Eleanor Hayes. "This isn't trimming fat, it's amputating limbs." The battle lines formed with remarkable speed. In Musk's corner, libertarian economists, crypto enthusiasts, and Silicon Valley acolytes who had long dreamed of government shrunk to near invisibility. Standing opposed, labor unions, social welfare organizations, and establishment economists who saw in his proposals echoes of failed policies past. What Musk had intended as a technical critique of fiscal inefficiency had exposed something far more fundamental: the growing chasm between the techno-oligarchy's vision for America and the social safety nets that millions depended upon. His attacks on the Fed had crystallized the underlying question of his entire campaign: was government a system to be optimized, or a covenant to be honored? As markets trembled and political operatives scrambled, Trump watched the unfolding drama with calculated interest. Musk's economic radicalism made his own once controversial positions seem almost moderate by comparison, a political gift that required no reciprocation. America's streets thundered with the footsteps of the discontented. What began as isolated pockets of resistance had swelled into a tidal wave of dissent, spreading across 277 cities like wildfire across a parched landscape. The people had found their voice, and it echoed from coast to coast with unmistakable clarity. Cal Morgan watched as protesters filled downtown squares and suburban parks alike. Their signs, as diverse as their backgrounds, shared a common theme: resistance against the Musk-driven economic vision. "This isn't about politics anymore," shouted Elena Ramirez, a nurse from Phoenix, as she stood shoulder to shoulder with factory workers and tech employees. "This is about survival." In Detroit, auto workers linked arms with teachers. In Austin, software engineers marched alongside service industry staff. The traditional boundaries of class and profession had dissolved in the face of policies perceived as benefiting only those at society's pinnacle. The protests represented more than mere discontent. They embodied a fundamental questioning of America's direction. Outside a Tesla facility in Fremont, a sea of protesters parted momentarily as Reverend Marcus Johnson addressed the crowd. "When the architects of our economy prioritize Mars colonies over Medicare, space travel over living wages, something profound has broken in our national covenant." Each demonstration painted the portrait of a nation increasingly divided, not simply between red and blue states, but between competing visions of what America ought to be. Musk's techno-libertarian blueprint, with its emphasis on efficiency and optimization, stood in stark contrast to the protesters' calls for equity and protection of society's most vulnerable. Political analysts noted the unprecedented coalition forming before their eyes. "We're witnessing the collapse of traditional political alignments," observed Dr. Hannah Chen of Georgetown University. "When working-class conservatives march alongside progressive activists, something tectonic is shifting in our political landscape." As night fell on the protests, smartphones illuminated thousands of faces in an ethereal glow. The images flooding social media told a story that transcended partisan narratives, of an America grappling with the consequences of unchecked technological power and the growing chasm between innovation's promises and its human costs. For Musk, who had once commanded adoration from across the political spectrum, the nationwide uprising represented a stark reality check. His vision of streamlined governance and tech-driven solutions now faced its most significant challenge, not from political opponents, but from the very foundation of American democracy, its people. The spotlight swung from America's streets to its corridors of power, where a different kind of chaos reigned. Donald Trump's administration had transformed governance into something between a reality show and an improvised comedy act, a spectacle that left seasoned political observers simultaneously horrified and transfixed. Cal Morgan observed how Trump's cabinet meetings resembled medieval court sessions, with officials performing elaborate rituals of praise before their mercurial king. Policy decisions that would reshape millions of lives were made and unmade on whims, announced via pre-dawn tweets that sent markets spiraling and advisors scrambling. "We've never run government like a business before because government isn't a business," remarked former Secretary of Defense James Mattis, one of the many officials who had passed through Trump's revolving door of appointments. The administration's hallmark became theatrical bluster masking administrative dysfunction, a governing philosophy built on confrontation rather than competence. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance emerged as perhaps the most fascinating contradiction in American politics. The author who had chronicled Appalachian poverty in his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, had transformed himself from Trump critic to Trump acolyte, from working-class chronicler to Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Vance's metamorphosis embodied America's class paradox: the son of the struggling heartland who attended Yale Law School before returning to claim he still represented forgotten Americans, despite his newfound wealth and power. His political rise demonstrated the enduring appeal of class authenticity, even when that authenticity had been carefully curated and polished for maximum electoral impact. "The elites in both parties don't understand the dignity of work," Vance proclaimed at a rally in Cincinnati, as Cal Morgan noted the $5,000 suit that now clothed the self-proclaimed hillbilly and the private jet waiting to whisk him to his next appearance. Together, Trump and Vance represented twin performances of American populism, one brash and unfiltered, the other intellectualized and calculated. Both claimed to champion ordinary Americans while moving comfortably among the ultra-wealthy. Both leveraged resentment against coastal elites while enjoying the fruits of elite privilege. As protests continued across the nation, these political performances played to an increasingly skeptical audience. citizens who recognized the gap between rhetoric and reality, between promised salvation and delivered results. The American drama intensified, with its characters locked in conflicts that would determine not just elections, but the very future of the republic itself. As America's internal power struggles captivated its citizens, Cal Morgan turned his gaze beyond its borders, where a far more consequential drama was unfolding in silence. The financial markets, those cold, calculating arbiters of national fortune, had rendered their verdict on Trump's economic nationalism. The dollar, once the unquestioned king of global currency, had begun a slow, undeniable descent. In trading floors from London to Singapore, the whispers had become roars. "Smart money doesn't wait for collapse," remarked one Frankfurt banker who requested anonymity. "It anticipates it." Europe, long dismissed by American exceptionalists as a fading power, now found itself the unexpected beneficiary of America's self-inflicted wounds. Capital flowed across the Atlantic in unprecedented volumes, not as tourists, but as refugees seeking safer shores. Ursula von der Leyen, addressing the European Parliament in Brussels, maintained diplomatic restraint while barely concealing a note of vindication. Europe remains committed to stable, rules-based international commerce. "We stand ready to be the anchor of global economic stability in uncertain times." The irony wasn't lost on Cal Morgan. Trump's America First policies had accelerated America's relative decline. His tariffs, designed to protect American industry, had instead triggered retaliatory measures that fragmented global supply chains. The manufacturing renaissance he promised remained elusive, while inflation eroded the purchasing power of the very working-class voters who had propelled him to power. Even traditional allies were recalibrating their economic relationships. Canadian Prime Minister Danielle Smith, facing pressure from provincial leaders, announced a strategic trade diversification initiative. "Canada must ensure economic stability through balanced international partnerships," she stated, diplomatic code for reducing dependence on an increasingly volatile American market. Financial analysts noted the historic shift with clinical precision. For the first time since World War II, non-dollar denominated assets were becoming the preferred haven for global wealth. The euro, once dismissed as a failed experiment during the sovereign debt crisis, had emerged stronger and more resilient than anyone predicted. As Cal Morgan surveyed this changing landscape, the connection between domestic political theater and international economic consequences became starkly clear. America's divisions and dysfunction weren't merely internal affairs. They were reshaping the global order, diminishing American influence, and creating vacuums that others were eager to fill. The spectacle that entertained had morphed into a tragedy that impoverished, as the world's economic center of gravity shifted perceptibly away from the nation that had anchored it for generations. The economic battlefield widened as Cal Morgan observed the unfolding drama between superpowers. China's leadership, meeting in closed sessions in Beijing, had made their calculation: they would not yield to American pressure. Their response to Trump's tariffs came swiftly and strategically, targeting American agricultural exports with surgical precision. Across the heartland, American farmers watched markets collapse in real time. "They're hitting us where it hurts most," said an Iowa soybean farmer, his weathered face reflecting generations of resilience now tested by geopolitical games beyond his control. "This isn't about politics anymore, this is about survival." Meanwhile, to the north, Canada's energy sector reconsidered its decades-long relationship with its dominant customer. In Alberta's provincial capital, Prime Minister Danielle Smith faced mounting pressure from oil executives and regional leaders. The whispers of redirecting Canadian crude to Asian markets grew louder by the day. "Canada must secure its economic future through diversified partnerships," Smith announced, her carefully measured words barely masking a fundamental shift in North American energy dynamics. Behind closed doors, Canadian officials had already begun talks with Chinese counterparts about expanded pipeline capacity to Western ports. The global markets responded with predictable nervousness. Wall Street analysts, those canaries in the economic coal mine, issued increasingly alarmed guidance. One J.P. Morgan report noted bluntly, "The fracturing of North American energy integration represents an unprecedented risk factor for U.S. industrial production and consumer energy costs." Elon Musk, watching these developments from his position in Trump's inner circle, found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His Tesla empire depended on global supply chains and Chinese rare earth minerals, the very networks now threatened by the policies he publicly championed. The contradictions were not lost on the global financial elite. In Davos, where the world's wealthy gathered to discuss humanity's future while sipping champagne, the conversation had shifted dramatically. "The American-led order is unraveling before our eyes," remarked one European banking executive. "The question isn't whether this reshuffles global power, it's how quickly and how dramatically." As Cal Morgan surveyed this rapidly shifting terrain, one truth emerged with crystal clarity. In the weaponization of trade policy for political theater, all players risked mutual destruction. The global economy, built over decades of painstaking integration, was proving more fragile than anyone had imagined. And ordinary citizens, from factory workers in Michigan to farmers in Shandong province, would bear the heaviest costs of this dangerous game of economic brinkmanship. As the dust settled on the economic battlefields, Cal Morgan turned his lens to the true casualties of this grand political theater. American workers, families, and communities caught in the crossfire of ambition and retribution. In Lordstown, Ohio, where the skeletons of shuttered auto plants cast long shadows over abandoned parking lots, laid-off factory workers gathered at a local diner. Their conversations, once filled with production quotas and overtime hours, now centered on mortgage payments and healthcare costs. "3 generations of my family worked that assembly line," said Mike Connors, a third-generation auto worker with calloused hands and fading hope. "Now it's gone. Not because we didn't work hard enough, but because we became pawns in some global chess match." The ripple effect spread across America's industrial corridors with merciless efficiency. In steel towns, aluminum mills, and technology hubs, the impact of retaliatory tariffs transformed thriving communities into case studies of economic devastation. Consumer prices climbed steadily as supply chains fractured under the weight of political posturing. Businesses that had weathered recessions, automation challenges, and global competition now faced an insurmountable adversary: the weaponization of trade policy for political gain. Small manufacturing firms, particularly those dependent on imported components, closed their doors at record rates. "We're seeing a 37% increase in industrial bankruptcy filings," noted economist Patricia Hernandez of the Economic Policy Institute. "This isn't creative destruction, it's unnecessary devastation." Meanwhile, in the gleaming towers of financial districts, a different reality played out. Market speculators feasted on volatility, converting economic uncertainty into record profits. Private equity firms circled struggling American manufacturers, ready to dismantle generations of industrial heritage for quick returns. Elon Musk, once positioned as America's industrial savior, found his companies increasingly entangled in the contradictions of his own political alliances. Tesla's production costs soared as component prices reflected the new economic reality. The Techno King's Twitter pronouncements grew increasingly defensive, as critics pointed to the gap between his populist rhetoric and the material suffering of industrial communities. As the sun set on this chapter of American economic history, Cal Morgan reflected on the profound disconnect between those who initiated these economic wars and those who bore their consequences. The pursuit of power, whether political, technological, or financial, had extracted a devastating toll from the very citizens it claimed to champion. The question hanging in America's troubled air was both simple and profound. When the powerful play their games of thrones, who truly pays the price of their ambition? In the gathering twilight of this American saga, Cal Morgan stands witness to a nation divided against itself, not by the clean lines of ideology, but by the jagged fractures of ambition unchecked by wisdom. The spectacle of Musk and Trump's dance with power has revealed something profound about the American experiment. Behind the tweets and rallies, behind the stock surges and market crashes, lies a society straining under the weight of its contradictions. "We've created a system where the architects of crisis rarely experience its consequences," observes political scientist Eleanor Ramirez, watching as another factory town dims its lights perhaps permanently. The separation between decision and impact has never been wider. In Washington's marble corridors, in Silicon Valley's glass campuses, in Wall Street's trading floors, a new aristocracy has emerged, one that speaks the language of populism while orchestrating the largest upward transfer of wealth in modern history. Their brilliance is undeniable, their vision, often revolutionary, yet something essential has been lost in their ascension. The cameras follow Elon Musk as he tours a gleaming new facility, his words echoing with promises of tomorrow's prosperity. But the cameras seldom linger on the communities left behind, where tomorrow's uncertainty has replaced yesterday's stability. Donald Trump, master of the American stage, has perfected the art of channeling genuine suffering into political currency, an alchemy that transforms pain into power without necessarily healing what's broken. America stands at a crossroads not merely of policy, but of purpose. The technological revolution promised liberation, but delivered dependence. The political revolution promised power to the people, but consolidated it among the few. True leadership, the kind that builds rather than divides, requires more than dazzling IQ or commanding presence. It demands the humility to listen, the courage to admit error, and the wisdom to understand that progress without compassion creates only more sophisticated forms of suffering. As this chapter of the American story closes, Cal Morgan reflects on the ancient wisdom that seems increasingly foreign to modern leadership, that those who would govern must first learn to serve, and those who would transform must first understand what should be preserved. The lights of the nation flicker, not yet extinguished, but warning of storms that gather on the horizon. America's future will be determined not by the volume of its loudest voices, but by the character of its quietest actions. In the relentless pursuit of power and technological conquest, America faces a stark crossroads. The spectacle of Elon Musk's ambitions, Trump's theatrical politics, and the unraveling economy expose a nation divided, where innovation is shadowed by inequality and governance is challenged by ego. True leadership demands more than high IQs or bold rhetoric. It requires humility, responsibility, and a deep commitment to the people it serves. The future of America hangs in the balance, and only through honest reckoning can it hope to heal and thrive.